Why do some people bully? This is a question I wanted to answer. And we have a paper which is titled, Why do children and adolescents bully their peers? First of all, this paper gave us a definition for bullying, which I think is interesting. Bullying is defined as a form of peer aggression based on 3 defining features: intention to harm, repetitiveness, imbalance of power in favor of the perpetrator. Harming someone, repetitiveness, and an imbalance of power. The bully is more powerful than the victim, which seems like common sense, but this will come up soon, and it's very important to memorize this one. So why do some people bully? There's 2 theories that we can go through. One is called family system theory. And I'm going to read you out this study now. One study done by the Massachusetts Department of Public Health and the CDC surveyed nearly 6,000 middle and high schoolers and found that bullies were statistically more likely to have either been physically hurt by a family member or witnessed violence within the family than those who did not bully their peers. Bullies got bullied at home. It's what we probably expected at this point. You see, when a parent is aggressive to a child, in general, the child is not going to have a safe space for them to unleash their anger. You see, children don't learn anything. They really don't. Learning is a myth. You don't learn, you simply just imitate. Maybe you get to a point of like adulthood when you can start to learn, but as a child, you don't actually learn anything. You just imitate. So when a child demonstrates this behavior, or when an adult demonstrates this behavior to his child, this behavior of aggressiveness, of snappy, of arguments, of shouting and threats, the child will imitate. Now, the child can't imitate back to the parent because usually that would make the parent more angry. Imagine like a parent shouting at the child and beating the child, aggressive towards the child, and the child doing that back. In some cultures, in some families, that's normal and it's accepted, and the parent kind of just, in a lot of like abusive households and just in general in a lot of households, the child is not safe to be aggressive and angry back to the parents. So they've got this built up of anger, this resentment that needs to be unleashed. Can't do it at home, so where are they going to do it? With an abusive, unsupportive, aggressive, angry family, most likely you're going to make an abusive, unsupportive, aggressive bully, a child. That child then is going to displace that anger in an environment where they're not deeply punished for it. In an environment that, one, feels like there's no consequences for that anger. And for 2, something that's constant and never ending, like, in an environment where they can continuously, repetitively keep bullying and hurting someone else. And so now you realize school is a hotspot for bullying because it gives the bully an environment where there's largely no consequences for them for bullying another person. And also it gives them the repetitive nature. It lets them get reps in because it's every day, Monday to Friday, the same classes. There's like 50 opportunities per week for this bully to unleash like a little bit of anger on another kid. There's another theory. Why do some people bully? And it's genetics. I found this one very interesting. Researchers at Duke University and King's College London, they took 1,116 pairs of twins and had both their mothers and teachers report instances of victimization or of them being bullies themselves. So what I learned, I studied psychology as well, but I wasn't very good at it. I was brain dead till I was like 22 years old, really. Just taking drugs and partying and just wasting time and whatever. So even though I did study psychology, I did learn a few things. One thing I always learned was that doing studies on twins is deeply powerful because you can see if there's a genetic component to something. You can see if you take identical twins, they have the same genes, right? They look the same, they've got the same genes because like the egg splits into 2, so the egg has the same DNA both times. So essentially identical twins have the exact same genes. So if you see some kind of similarity between them compared to similarities that you may see in siblings who are not identical but were raised relatively the same, you can then see if there's a genetic component for something because that's the only difference, right? right? Does that make sense? If there's a family that has identical twins, and then there's a family that has siblings, like just brother and sister or two brothers, but they're not totally identical, you can start to see the differences between the people who have got the same genes and the ones who have got slightly different genes because they're siblings but not genetic twins. They found it to be statistically significant that both identical twins were more likely to be bullies than, or actually victims as well, than for the fraternal twins that weren't the same gene. So there's like identical twins, fraternal twins. Fraternal twins can be like the ones where two eggs go down into the woman to get ready to be impregnated, which means that it's very similar genes, but it's not identical. Fraternal twins, you may have seen, is like when you've heard of, you hear that this brother and sister are twins, but obviously they're not identical. They were born at the same time, but they're not identical because the boy and girl. So the difference you would assume, because they both are going to get raised in a somewhat similar way, especially when these type of studies control other variables, for example, you're just going to see the genetic impact. And it turns out that the identical twins were statistically more likely to be both victims and bullies themselves, which means that there is a little bit of some kind of genetic play. I wonder which part of like the gene it could be. Maybe it's like higher levels of testosterone or like some kind of maybe damage to the prefrontal cortex or something. They found this even more true for the case of boys. So for boys, there's a higher, stronger genetic component of being a bully.